Today, really excited to have Jeremy Wilson to share some of his knowledge with you. I've known Jeremy for a long time now, and uh, he is, he's one of the leaders in the knowledge space, if you want to call it that, in biking in particular, but also running. And on the equipment side, he's really been in that industry for a long time. He knows, like, all the brands, and had a bike shop for many years, and then went to work for Cervelo for a number of years. So really knows the ins and outs of the bike equipment space, and that has kind of led him down the aerodynamic testing road, and really just has a great foundation of knowledge. So I think this talk today is going to be really valuable. We certainly get a lot of questions about what equipment to buy, what wheels should I buy, should I get an aero helmet? I mean, things that, simple things like that. And usually what happens when I get that question is that I pick up the phone and call Jeremy and say, Jeremy, what should my answer be? So then I look smart, but it's actually Jeremy in the background who's our Intel guy. So Jeremy, welcome. I am going to mute myself, but of course I'm here, and I'll keep my face on for this talk as well. But thanks for joining us, and everybody, welcome Jeremy.
Thanks, Jazzy, and thank you to all you guys for making the time on a busy Friday morning. It's Friday, right? And just confirming. Okay, all right, yeah, good. So as Jazzy said, I have been in this space for a while. Jasper and I actually met originally in 2005, but he doesn't remember because he was too busy winning Ironman Canada the day that we met. We met on the run course. He was coming back on his second lap, and I was going out on my first lap, I think. I can't remember because it was so long ago and such a painful memory. I mean, just kidding. It was a fantastic memory. But in 2006, I opened and started Speed Theory in Vancouver. We had a sister store in Calgary as well. And I worked in the tri-space for 10 years in the retail side. So helping athletes of all different calibers, right down from professionals right to age groupers. And even first timers who were just praying to God that they could actually learn how to ride a bike and swim and run and participate and be part of it. And it was a ton of fun to work with everybody. And then after 10 years, I sold my business and went and worked for a supplier. I went and worked for Cervelo. I started out as a sales rep for them, covering the Pacific Northwest, and moved into a sales management role with them where I covered all of Canada and the Western United States. And then prior to that, I took some time off to travel and spent some time with the family. And then I started working with On Running. My background is exercise physiology and biomechanics, specifically in school. But during all of my schooling, I had actually worked in a retail environment, first off in a running environment, which is where I met my wife and got her hooked on marathoning. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell. I do want to talk to you guys a lot about some technical stuff, and some of it might just completely go right over your head. And if it does, don't hesitate. If you guys can turn your chat function on, so if you just put your mouse down to the lower portion of your screen, you can see the chat button right beside the share screen button. If you have any questions, feel free to either chat to me direct or chat to everyone. And just that way we can keep conversation flowing, we can keep everything going, and I can actually visually see what your question is and then address it as we do a deep dive. No questions yet? Perfect. So one of the things that I had the benefit of doing when I was at Speed Theory was I had gone to an aerodynamic presentation by one of the engineers from Cervelo and had gotten very, very interested in the aerodynamic profile and performance of product. And I got a contact from him and booked some time at the wind tunnel with some of our athletes that we were working with. We went down to the wind tunnel in Seattle at the University of Washington, and we spent 10 hours the first day. We were only down there for the one day, pardon me, that first year. And we took 6 athletes down there and we tested all of their athletes. We also happened to take down about $150,000 worth of equipment between the bikes, helmets, skin suits, shoes, and wheels with us for those 6 athletes. And we just played around in the wind tunnel. What came out of that was not just an understanding of aerodynamics, but it was also an understanding of the interaction of aerodynamics between a rider and a bike. And what ended up sort of being the take-home message for us was just how important aerodynamic position can be for the rider, but more importantly is the changes that you can make with a rider to better enhance them as opposed to focusing solely on equipment. So the next year we went down again, and we were there for 3 days. We were in the tunnel again, probably about 8 to 10 hours each day. We took 4 of the original 6 athletes with us again, just so that we had some comparable data from year to year. And then we actually ended up taking an additional 12 athletes with us, and we were testing everything. When I say everything, I mean road bikes, tri-bikes, race wheel setups, race setups, road helmets, aero helmets, skin suits, tri-suits, regular clothing. And one of the massive messages for us was equipment choice is not just imperative, it's also extremely unique. So what works for one doesn't work for the masses. So in saying that, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share the screen of my own personal data from that wind tunnel test, just so you guys can see what it is that we were delivering and how we were delivering that. Pardon me, just one sec, because my computer screen is not showing that file. I want to make sure that you guys can see that entire file. Can everybody see the full page of that?
I can't see it at my end yet, Jeremy.
Okay, hold on one sec. Sorry, guys.
I'm not sure why it's not coming up like it was before.
Yeah, either am I. Sorry, guys. This was working for us right at the beginning.
Are you on multiple screens by any chance, or are you?
Hang on one second. I'm just gonna put that, minimize. Oh, it could be because of the chat. Sorry, guys. Let's try this again. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, everybody can see this?
Yeah.
Now you can turn your mics on because I can't see you. So yeah, these are my own tests. This was the deliverable that we did for all of our athletes. One of the things that we wanted to do, and one of the things that's imperative to do whenever you're in a wind tunnel, is to take a baseline. And the baseline test is usually your first test. So it's an initial setup. So in my case, we were testing one specific bike with one setup, and that's what's highlighted in yellow. So that's my initial baseline test. We then actually used in the top section, you can see that we've set the speed at 32 kilometers per hour. We actually made this an adjustable parameter in our configuration for our reports. So if we knew what an athlete's target speed was for an Ironman distance, we could set that, and it would take the data and manipulate it into our speed per hour or our time savings in the 20, 40, 90, and 180 kilometer distances. So you can see on my baseline, we set the speed at 32 kilometers an hour. And so on my baseline, it points out at 32. If we had manipulated that, it would change that data up here in the speed, again, to whatever we had set it for. And then every run that we've done thereafter, you can see as a time savings over an Ironman, a half Ironman, a 40K, or a 20K distance. And you can see it represented in time. So my initial setup, obviously there's no savings It doesn't tell me what my Ironman time would be, but if you actually extract 32 kilometers an hour over 180K, it works out to about 540 if I remember correctly. So in the different setups, you can see how much time I could save over an Ironman. And I think at most I could save 102 minutes by actually not riding the bike and just letting the bike go without a rider right down the course on its own. Of course, that's not ideal because there's nobody pushing the pedals. But you could see that the greatest time savings I could get was 26 minutes and 32 seconds over an Ironman. So that would take a 540 down to a 515 roughly. The unfortunate bit is the position that I was in, which is the Superman position, is actually an illegal position. And of course, it's extremely uncomfortable and impossible to ride on the roads because you'll just ride into the back of somebody's wheel. What we ended up settling on for me ended up being this position here, which is the configuration 68, the P5 cask. And overall, that was able to save me 22 minutes and 31 seconds. Now, one of the reasons for that, and this was another thing that we had learned, was again, it had to do with what my position was on the bike. So I'm just going to see if I can share this screen here. So here I am in the wind tunnel. Number one, I am wearing a full armed skin suit, mostly because we were at the wind tunnel in February. And when you speed the wind up to 50 kilometers an hour, it takes the external temperature and typically drops it about 10 to 14 degrees centigrade. And basically it was -2 outside in Seattle that February. So inside the tunnel, it was close to -10. So we were pretty cold in there for a lot of the runs. But this is the setup I was planning on using for my Ironman in that year, 2014, except for the fact that I'm wearing a skin suit. So I would be in a sleeveless as opposed to a full sleeve suit. And you'll notice that the helmet I'm wearing, if you look at the very back, right in here where hopefully you guys can see me just doing that grid, there's a massive gap between the helmet and my shoulder blades. And if we look at the next picture, I think this is the correct one. You can see in this picture here, that gap is quite substantial, but because of the size of the helmet.
Can't see it, Jeremy.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. Thanks, Joanna. How about now? You guys can see this?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So you can see that that gap is still massive, but because of the height of the helmet, there's not as much helmet in the wind. And this ended up being a much cleaner run for me with this helmet. So the funny thing about it is the first picture I showed you guys, that helmet was actually testing extremely fast for all of our athletes. In fact, there were only 2 out of all 18 athletes that we tested with that helmet that it didn't work for. And a lot of that had to do with body position. So what we ended up taking away from this was, and it won't show more in the pictures, but we ended up taking away from this the fact that the uniqueness of the rider is really, really, really imperative and important in a wind tunnel. Mostly because the rider represents 75 to 80% of the aero drag on a bike. So I want you guys to just think about that for 1 second. Okay, so 75 to 80% of the drag on a bike is you. So we've all probably spent thousands of dollars on our equipment. We've all probably spent that money on bikes, race wheels, helmets, bottles, tires, all of this equipment to make us faster. And one of the easiest ways to make yourself faster is to work on yourself. This was the lesson we learned on our second trip. And This was reinforced at my time at Cervelo. Equipment changes on bikes and wheels are massive. Don't get me wrong. They can be extremely, extremely helpful, but they're also very constant in the sense of your position on a bike is the position that you can physically ride. If you can't ride in an aerodynamic position in your aero bars, then you're limited to your aerodynamic profile. So how do you change the aerodynamics? Well, buying a tri bike with that aero bar setup, if you can't ride in it, is kind of pointless because you can't ride that position. So while the bike stays constant, your body is what doesn't stay constant. So learning how to ride in that position is imperative. So what we learned from this was that bike fit was absolutely one of the most important aspects of aerodynamics. So the first place to start was always with your bike fit. Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable riding in aero bars? Are you comfortable in that position for a long period of time? How long can you ride that position? Can you eat? Can you drink? These were all questions that we ended up coming out of the wind tunnel with and having a better understanding of that. So what we ended up coming away with were more questions than answers. And it was an expensive prospect because I don't know if you're aware of it, but a wind tunnel hour, just 1 hour, usually costs $1,000 Canadian. And we had just spent the better part of close to 30 hours in a wind tunnel. So that's a lot of money and not something that everybody will typically invest. But what we ended up coming away with was a clear direction of how to better curate responses to athletes in order to choose their product. So for everybody, if it's unique, you want to focus on the things that you can control. So clothing, that's a massive, massive, massive thing. If you're wearing a shirt that, and I apologize, but I'm going to stand up. You can just see, I'm actually wearing a fairly snug golf shirt, but if you're wearing a shirt that just sticks out and is loose enough, just like this, that can actually represent close to 5 minutes in an Ironman. That's 5 minutes of free time just by wearing something that actually fits you a little bit snug or a little tighter. You've seen the advent on the pro circuit where athletes are now wearing a sleeved, be it short sleeve or long, or even a 3/4 sleeve suit. Those sleeves can actually make a big difference as well because you're not exposing your arms and your armpits to the wind, and so it helps keep that drag down. Helmets, learning how to actually get into your aero position on your bike. So when you're buying an aero helmet now, it's almost ideal to take your bike with you or ride to the shop so that when you put your aero helmet on, you can actually get onto your aero bars and see, can you close the back of the helmet down to your shoulder blades like I did, illustrated in my picture? Because if you can't, then you're paying for a helmet that may actually slow you down. And if you can't get that gap closed, then buying one of those short nubbed helmets like a Casque Bambino or a Giro, that can actually be a better choice for you. So equipment choice can come in handy. The biggest thing that we learned was when you're in that aero bar position, how long can you hold it? Okay, where do you put your nutrition? Because we're spending all this money on this equipment and all these bikes, and then we haven't loaded our food. We haven't put our bottles on there. We haven't put gels onto it. We haven't put our tools. We haven't put other bottles on the back. So how does that interact with everything? So you're really being very thorough with that type of a setup. And as Jasper had mentioned, I mean, this is something that I've been working with him behind the scenes on for a few years now, where when you guys are asking your coaches, they might not have all the answers, but they do have a resource or some resources that can help you with that. As an example, I'll throw this question out there. How many of you are planning on riding an Ironman this year and have already figured out what your nutrition needs and what your nutrition position is on the bike? Joanna, you found that funny? So because you laughed,
I think all of us are like, we probably won't ride and do an Ironman this year.
well, okay, that's fair. All right. Okay.
mean, no, I definitely don't think about, I guess I think about nutrition, yes, but I don't know what you mean by nutrition position, like where it's going on our bike.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I guess I do the same thing every race. So I guess, but it doesn't necessarily work. So,
Okay. So this was actually a question that Cervelo asked. And one of the reasons for it was that when Cervelo designed the P5 in 2011, they designed it around trying to make athletes as fast as possible. They then went and followed up with a lot of their pro athletes, but they sent 4 engineers. Keep in mind, these are guys that are designing product. They sent them to 20 Ironman and half Ironman races over the course of the next 2 years. And they took pictures of every single bike in transition in all of those races. And what they were looking at was bike setups for nutrition. As a percentage, can you guys take a stab? I'll give you 3 choices, and you can all chat. You can all put them up into your chat what your answer is, okay? So from a percentage standpoint, the most common percentage of commonality for setup on this was greater than 15%. That's choice 1. Choice 2 was between 10 and 15%. And choice 3 is between 5 and 10%. So go ahead and type your answers into the chat section, 1, 2, or 3. So greater than 15%, less than, between 10 and 15%, or between 5 and 10%. So we've got 1. Okay. So we've got 3 people saying 3, 2 people saying 2, 3. Okay, so it was actually 7%. That was the most common nutritional setup over 20 Ironman and half Ironman races. And this is back in the era of 3,000 people racing in an Ironman. So do the math on it. That's a lot of bikes and a lot of bike setups and a lot of bike pictures that they took. So what Cervelo decided off of this was, we've designed this bike that people are altering within the setup, because they're putting 5 bottles, 2 bottles, 3 bottles. They're taping their gels to the top tube. They're using a bento box. There was one setup that they had a picture of, and I wish I could have had the image, but the athlete had 20 gels. I kid you not, 10 of them, 5 on each side of the base bar, taped down wide, and then all the other gels were taped on the top tube, running from the stem all the way back to their seat tube. So when Cervelo went to design their next bike, they really looked at this as being the massive challenge for them, is where do people put their stuff? And they actually did that. They mimicked that exact setup in the wind tunnel. And the penalty on the bike was massive. Like, when I say massive, over an Ironman, I'm talking about a 30-minute difference between that setup and the original setup that the bike was designed for. I'll let that sink in. So putting your nutrition on your bike cost you 30 minutes over an Ironman. Now, granted, the nutrition will shrink because you're eating it, but that was a huge, huge penalty, which is one of the reasons why Cervelo designed a bike, and not just them, but you can see it now with Specialized. They've done it with their bikes. Trek has done it with some of their bikes as well. Felt has done it with the new IA disc, where they're actually trying to integrate storage, or they're trying to clean up where you're putting your bottles. So they're not giving you the freedom to choose where all of your nutrition does go. But this is something that, as athletes, I mean, we're all not buying these super bikes, or don't all own these super bikes yet. But this is something that we don't think about. It's second nature. It's something that gets bypassed. But if you can practice that now, the same way that you're practicing transition, same way that you're practicing swimming, biking, running, your core workouts. But if you start being thoughtful with it now, then come race day, it's habitual. So learning how to position your bike or your nutrition on there. Where do you want to put your gels? Where do you want to put your bars? Where do you want to put your salt tabs? Where do you want to put your spare tires, your spare inner tubes? How are you going to run the nutrition? How many bottles do you need? What are you drinking? Where are you positioning those bottles? That part is actually as important as your equipment choice. And practicing that now, especially in this time where we're all riding, a lot of us are riding indoors, that's a perfect time to practice. Put the bottles on your bike. Be able to reach around. You're not having to balance the bike outdoors, but is it easy for you to reach? Are you a right-hand drinker? Do you reach behind you? Are you reaching down with your right hand? Are you a left-hand drinker? Is it easier for you to have an aero bottle in front with a straw that reminds you to drink? Is it easier for you to have a bottle out front that you can pull? Which direction do you pull that bottle? Those are all things to think about, because those can all affect your aerodynamics, but they can also affect your performance on race day. What we learned from this was that nutrition setup was just as important as a clothing choice, as a helmet choice, and as a wheel choice.
Jeremy.
Yep.
Where you may have mentioned this in your sort of research and figuring it out, did you find a bottle placement? Because I feel like that's one of the more challenging places. Bikes have the screws where you're supposed to put them. You mentioned reaching around behind the seat. Was there a favorable place that you found? Was it the one in between the aero bars where you drink? Where was the best place?
Yes, we did. So we found that a single bottle in the frame was ideal on the down tube, and that bottle size in the down tube is a 750 round on most of the new bikes. If you've got an older generation bike, when I say an older generation, I would say anything older than 2014, then if you have the ability to run one of those never reach systems, like a speed fill, where it sits in the triangle of your frame and the straw comes all the way up, that's actually a really fast setup. And of course, your nutrition is very handy because it holds so much. Off the back, a single bottle off the back, and it needs to be 750 to 1 liter in size. The smaller bottles, the 500s off of the back, end up slowing you down because there's not enough space to clean up the air off of the back of the bike. That was the two main setups. The front setup is a little bit more on the unique side, in the sense of, if you're running a bottle in between your hands, there are two systems that are out there. There's a system where you can put a regular traditional bottle, or there's a teardrop system. And both of them aren't really an aerodynamic penalty, but they're more a personal choice. So that front setup is more the unique setup of what each athlete can curate around what works best for them. For some athletes, having the straw constantly in their face is a reminder to drink, which is way more important than, the penalty of, call it 2 or 3 watts to put a bottle in there that they're never going to drink out of. Because if you've got something in between your arms that you're not using, then it's useless. What we did find was that the front setup, if you were running a bottle setup like an X-Lab Stealth system, which allows for you to put a regular bottle cage on there, if you can turn it backwards so that you're pulling the bottle out towards you as opposed to pulling it out in front of you, that helps to stabilize the bike. But what it also allows is, it allows you to put a bigger bottle there so that you can put more nutrition in front of you. And the rotation of the bottles then becomes, this is what you're primarily drinking out of. And you can take those drinks, and when that bottle is empty, rather than having to focus on refilling it, is that you can change it with the other bottles on your bike. So you can alternate the bottles. So you're constantly rotating a full bottle into the front and the other bottles are empty. If you're doing a really short triathlon, it's also extremely fast to run the bottle setup on all your bikes, because the bottles actually do speed the bike up.
Just so I understood what you said there, you said it's actually having some bottles makes it better?
Yes.
Not bottles.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you're going to take a bottle off of the bike, the down tube bottle is the penalty. So the one in the frame, that's the only one to take off the bike. The one on the back and the one in the aero bars actually speeds you up.
Right. And why?
The one in front of your your hands actually closes the gap between your forearms. And by closing that gap between your forearms, there's no wind flow that gets in there. So there's not as much turbulence when it reaches into your knees. The one off of the back, it helps streamline the wind flow coming off of your lower back when you're in the aero bar position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now this is also assuming that you're in the aero position, because the second you break that aero bar position, you get onto your base bars, the massive effect of that is huge. So from a nutrition standpoint, one of the things that we were talking about with our pro athletes that we were working with, and one of those pro athletes was Jeff Simons. Jeff had actually agreed that I could share some of his information with you. We were finding that when Jeff was climbing, he was out on his base bar, but when he was descending, he was staying on his base bar because he wanted to have his hands close to the brakes. And we found that if we could get Jeff into his aero bars while he was descending, we could save him we did it over the course of Ironman Canada, the original Penticton course. But we found we could save him about 2.5 to 3 minutes on his bike split just by staying in his aero bars coming down all the hills. So one of the things that we would look at is how he was eating. And what we found was that Jeff was breaking his aero bar position to eat. So if you're eating every 5 minutes and you have to break your aero position every 5 minutes, that creates a penalty in that drag. Okay, so Lindsay, you've just asked a question. What would you recommend for storage of solid foods for longer races if you don't have integrated storage on your bike? That's a very, very awesome question. Jersey pockets. Store it on your body if you can. If you've got a jersey pocket that is deep enough to hold all of your bars, fantastic. If not, then a bento box is the cleanest place to store your bars. It doesn't matter if it's a Velcroed on bento box or if it's one of those integrated bento boxes, but a bento box itself that can hold the bars. If you can't get them all into that, then trying to do a combination where they're in the back pocket or a jersey pocket. The other place that you can tuck them, and this really depends on having tight shorts, is tucking them up and under the leg of your short, because that it actually is nice and close to your body, so the heat that you generate can sometimes melt the bar a bit and soften the food up. But getting back to what I were talking about with Jeff, is that every time he broke his aero position, he was slowing down. And as he was slowing down to eat, definitely he had to eat, but he was giving away that much time. So just by doing that, we ended up actually saving him close to 8 minutes over his Ironman the year he won Australia. Wow. And a lot of that was attributed to the fact that he was eating in the aero bar position and staying as aero as possible for as long as possible. So those are things that you guys can practice when you're training now. When Jasper's giving you your sets and Alicia's giving you your sets and all the other coaches are setting you up, is take some of your race day nutrition downstairs or onto your bike with you. Practice eating. Okay, can I eat in the aero bar position? Can I ride in the aero bar position for my total workout? Stephen, fanny packs are never an alternative. So his question is, if your jersey has small pockets, are fanny packs an alternative? No, fanny packs are for travelers who are taking cameras and on massive family trips and want to embarrass their kids. And Stephen followed that up with his wife, Gail, wants to know. Stephen, it's always great to ask a question for somebody else. I appreciate that.
Just to be clear, Stephen and Jeremy know each other. So this isn't like the mean side of Jeremy coming out, but I love that answer.
No, in all seriousness, a lot of tri-suits have smaller pockets because they're trying to reduce the aerodynamic drag on the back of the suit. So having small pockets back there is a limiter and usually can hold a few gels. At some point, you might have to resort to taping your stuff onto your frame somewhere. using electrical tape to wrap around the top end of a gel so that when you tear the gel off, it tears off the top for you and opens the gel at the same time. It's not ideal. It can be a massive penalty, but if you've got nowhere else to put the product, you have to have the stuff that you're going to be using on race day. And depending on neutral support can sometimes be a bit of a pain. Short pockets. So Megan has asked, what about short pockets? Yep, short pockets are also super helpful because you're not creating massive disturbance in aeroflow.
Does somebody else type something in there, or can I jump in?
No, jump in.
Okay. You mentioned the importance of staying in the aero position whenever you can. I mean, obviously safety first. You know, if you want to feel safe first, and if you need to cover the brakes, you need to be in that position. But what did you find, or what would your opinion on staying in the aero position as an incline goes up? I remember, you know, back in the day, there was an athlete named Natasha Badman. Most people know who she is. If you don't, she won Hawaii 6 times or something. I mean, she was very dominant in her day. Still races, I think, well into her 50s as a pro. I'm not sure if she's moved to age group yet, but anyway, I remember her doing races where literally she wouldn't get out of the aero position. So she was comfortable enough that she could climb. So what's your opinion on, like, where's the breaking point of, okay, I'm going uphill. Now I need to maybe come out of the bars and sit up so I can maybe generate a bit more power. Like, if I feel more comfortable there, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, definitely. You know, that breaking point is different for every athlete because that breaking point is also quite physically a tipping point. At what point is the bike going to tip over? How slow can you ride and mash the pedals on a climb in that aero position? That's not really something that I, as an athlete, have been comfortable testing because I don't like road rash or breaking things. But if you can climb in an aero position, it is actually to your advantage. One of the sayings that we had at Cervelo was that aero is always on, meaning that aerodynamics are constant. If you think about it from a swimming perspective, you are constantly pushing your body through the water. So what's the resistance in the water? It's always the water. It's the density of the liquid. Well, when you're on the bike, what are you pushing against? What is the number one force that you're pushing against? It's the wind. That is the number one force, and it's constant. It doesn't matter if it's a tailwind. It doesn't matter if it's a side wind. It doesn't matter if it's a headwind. It is the wind. That is that constant force that you're trying to overcome. So if you can stay as aerodynamic as possible for as long as possible, then that works in your favor.
So basically, even at very, very slow speeds, there's an aerodynamic advantage that can be had.
Yes.
At very slow speeds, because I know it is, I don't know if it's exponential, but as you get faster, it becomes more important. Is that true, or is it just important all the time?
It's true, but also it's actually not. It doesn't get exponentially better for you. As you get faster, your aerodynamic position becomes more imperative, and the break in that aerodynamic position becomes exponentially worse for you because it creates more drag for you to overcome. The biggest question I used to get was from athletes that would say, well, I just want to finish. So why do I need to focus on aerodynamics? Why do I need to spend all this money on a fast bike, on fast helmet, on fast clothing, on race wheels, and so on and so forth? It's not like I'm a pro. The athlete that is out on the course the longest has the greatest benefit of aerodynamics. And I'm saying this honestly, you actually benefit greater than a professional tour rider will benefit as a percentage. A professional tour rider or a professional triathlete is going to ride at a set speed, and aerodynamic gains for them are going to be in the percentages of percents. So they're going to at most gain 1 to 3% of their time at best. So if you take somebody that was riding a 50-minute 40K TT and you improve their aerodynamics, they're not going to all of a sudden ride a 45-minute TT. They're going to ride a 49.50 or a 49.45. But if you take somebody that is riding an hour and 20-minute 40K TT and you improve their aerodynamics, they could potentially drop down to an hour 15 or an hour 10 just by improving their aerodynamics. I'm not talking about fitness performances or fitness gains. I'm only talking about the aerodynamic gains. As a percentage, that slower athlete is actually gaining more. Does that make sense to everybody? If it doesn't make sense, then put your hand up. Okay, I'm just gonna actually scroll through all the cameras. Of course, now everybody's got their cameras off, so all I see are names.
So Jeremy, on that note, if you have more in your talk, just make me be quiet, because I'll go down all kinds of rabbit holes with you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like obviously to get the highest end bike or wheels or whatever, there's a real cost to it. So could you maybe prioritize, like, because lots of people are on a budget,
Yep.
Not everybody
Definitely.
can just go and spend whatever you need to spend. What are the most important things that maybe, I've heard things like better to have a good aero front wheel than a good aero back wheel. And I've heard, the fork is important, or the things in the leading edge of the wind, or is a helmet better? You mentioned having tight fitting clothing. That would probably be a fairly inexpensive purchase. So how would you prioritize it on a budget?
On a budget, my priorities would be clothing first, making sure you get as tight fitting clothing as possible. I'm 5'10", about 155 pounds, and I would try and buy as small a jersey as I can fit. I have a couple of jerseys that I wear for time trial or even for races that are men's extra smalls, and like they're painted on. It takes me about 5 minutes to get into my jersey. It's that tight. But clothing would be the first. Second would be helmet. Third would be a toss-up between race wheels and bike frame. I think I would do wheels over frame first if I had to. And actually, the easiest thing you guys can do is, like I'd mentioned, was your nutrition setup, focusing on that, making sure that that's a clean use. That's probably the easiest and cheapest way. But clothing first, helmets, wheels, then frame. Wheels wise, we actually learned a lot about the wheels in the tunnel, Jasper, just to go down this little bit of a rabbit hole real quick. The front wheel, it doesn't really depend on the depth of that wheel unless you're in crosswinds. So the shallower that front wheel is in a crosswind, the better it handles. The deeper it is, the worse it handles. So the wheel selection up front is more dependent on the wind choice. So if you're riding Kona, for example, having a super deep front wheel can be detrimental. And in fact, one of our other athletes was choosing between a Zip 303 and a Zip 808 for Kona and chose to ride his 303 because of the crosswinds. The rear wheel, if you can get a disc, that is the most aerodynamic and stable advantage. The rear wheel stabilizes your bike. The front wheel controls your bike. The other aspect that I do want to bring up, and it does relate to aerodynamics, was bike maintenance. If you have a dirty bike, if your bike's not clean, if it's not working properly, then aerodynamics are the least of your problem, right? Mechanical issues are a big problem, but a clean bike is a huge difference maker from a bike perspective. We measured a dirty bike in the tunnel and then cleaned it and then remeasured that bike. And it was a difference of about 4 grams of drag. So that works out to about 4 watts with a dirty bike. That surprised us. We measured the bike with no rider. So again, you put the rider on there and that changes dramatically, but a dirty bike, just think about that. Like having mud on your base bar created enough distortion in the wind to actually factor into 4 watts. So cleaning your bike is imperative. Maintaining your bike is imperative. I know we've talked a lot about this, and we're 50 minutes in, so I want to stay true to our time. But Jasper, I know you and I talked about potentially having another one of these conversations as well, and I think it would probably be worth having that conversation around bike maintenance, as well as some other equipment choices that we can combine into another session if you're interested.
I think people would be very interested. I mean, even being in this sport for as long as I have, I really love discussions around this topic. And I think a lot of people do, because there's just so much out there. We're bombarded by usually marketing information from companies, and it's hard to weed through what's actually useful and what's not. So I definitely think we should, we can do, I think we can do multiple chats with Guru Jeremy for sure. I think it'd be good, but this has been great. I really appreciate the aerodynamic thing. Is just, it's a buzzword. It's talked about so much in our space, and to kind of get a deeper look and an inside look of what's useful and what's valuable is awesome. So good.
Okay. Well, to close that off, actually, then from an aerodynamic space, marketing wise, Jasper, you're right. Aerodynamics is the buzzword. It's the selling mechanism that companies are using. And I do want to preface this in the sense of, a lot of companies will say they have the most aero X: wheels, helmet, clothing, shoe covers, chains, whatever, they're trying to sell. That marketing is a marketing program. One of the things that they are allowed to advertise when they are saying that our wheels are the most aerodynamic, they're not telling you at what yaw angle. So yaw is, if you think about the bike being straight on in the wind and a headwind coming straight on, yaw is to which degree the bike is actually facing in the wind. And in a wind tunnel, you can actually go out to -20 on the left-hand side and +20 degrees on the right-hand side. And when you're doing that, you're changing the profile of how the wind is hitting your product. So you can see what a crosswind or a side wind is going to do to equipment. When a company boasts about what product they're selling, they're not telling you at what angle they've actually taken the reading at, because at certain angles, certain products actually outperform other products. So just be leery of that marketing buzzword of this is the most aerodynamic product. You want to find what works best for you in your setup and in your position. And if you are curious about that, I'm sure this is something you can approach your coaches about, and we can work out a way where we can take a look at your aerodynamic position together as a group, and then work on what we can improve on without having to spend a whole ton of money. But that being said, from that standpoint, one of the tools that is being worked on, and I'm going to share a screen again here, so hopefully you guys can see what I'm about to share. This is the next evolution of what is happening in the bike space and the bike world. This is personal aerodynamic sensors. These have not been released to market yet. This is a company that is designing something that's going to be probably available to market in the next 8 months to a year. It's called Ghibli Tech, and it's an aerodynamic sensor that works the same way that a power meter works on your bike. So you can actually put this on your bike and it will read your aerodynamics and spit out a number at you. And then you can actually go and ride the same course and see what improvements you can make. Summer asks if that device is similar to Nodio. Yes, Nodio is a product that's on the market right now that does something like this. There are some subtle differences with it. This space is very, very new in the bike world. This has been going around in aircraft maintenance and in the aerospace world for a long time. It's just now making its way to sports applications. and it is similar to Nodio. I would preface that a lot of the companies that are initially launching in this space right now are launching as new technologies. So anytime you're an early adopter of new technologies, there are always improvements that get made. I'm sure nobody is running an original iPhone right now, are they? Well, Jasper is, but Jasper still has a flip phone.
I'm considering going back to one, to be honest. And just so I don't dominate the airspace here, it's just that I have a whole bunch of questions stacking up my brain. Please jump in if you do have a question, and I'll be quiet. But I did have a follow-up to the slide you just showed, and that was a question around, okay, so it's $1,000 an hour to go to a wind tunnel. You know, considering that's probably way off budget for most people, and let's take this new technology aside. Obviously, there's things that you can do that make a difference, so tighter clothing. Is there any way, we used to have some ways we would test our aerodynamics, but I don't know if it was actually working. So we would go to a velodrome, and we would ride in a set gear at a set speed, and then we would change things and see if it adjusted the wattage required to hold that speed. So we had things that were in place, but it was kind of rudimentary. Like the wind tunnel is obviously the best. I've seen some other products out there that kind of do like visual imaging of you, almost apps I think you can get now that kind of will look at what you look like and give you feedback. Any recommendations or opinion on what a good way to test it is, or is it just like, anyway, you jump in.
No, definitely. That's a great question. I think the easiest way for us as athletes to test without forking out the money is to use a course or a set route, because most of us don't have access to a velodrome, indoors or outdoors. But using something that's flat and where it's constant. So ideally what you would do is you would find a stretch of a road that's 5 kilometers to 10 kilometers in length that you don't have any turnarounds or stop signs on, and where the wind is going to be relatively constant. And if you want to change your improvement or see what your rate of improvement is, you would ride at a set wattage, at a set cadence, at a set speed. Well, sorry, not a set speed, but a set wattage and a set cadence. And you would measure that rate of change over that 5 or 10K section of road. So you would ride out those 5K. That would be your one leg. You do an easy spin back, and then make the change that you want to test, and then ride the exact same route at the exact same wattage. Wattage needs to be a constant. I know you did a power talk last week, and I don't know how many people have power meters. I know at least one person on this call that does not have a power meter yet. Sorry, sis, to call you out, but buy a power meter.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Power is one of the most accurate metrics in cycling right now. It's a constant, and power is one of the more important aspects to be able to give you feedback for what your exertion level is. But if you're not riding at constant power over that section, then it's going to change the parameters. So Summer asked, can I recommend a power meter? I usually recommend a power meter that works and tells you power as a number. Sorry, that's my sarcastic side. A number of power meters that are on the market right now, they're all fairly accurate. They're all within about 1% to 2% accuracy. Doesn't matter if you're using a pedal system, a crank-based system, or a wheel-based system. My preference, if you've got multiple bikes, is a pedal-based system, because you can take it from bike to bike and it doesn't cost you extra money. If you've got multiple bikes, then you would need to buy multiple crank arms to put on the bike, or multiple cranks to put on each bike, and that can be more pricey. The pedal systems like the Garmin Vectors, the Cyclops power pedals, they actually work very, very well. And it doesn't matter if you're buying a dual side or a single side. So if you want to keep the price down, the single sides, I believe, are 790 Canadian dollars for a single side Vector. And they are very accurate. I have used those. They are also handy because if you're renting a bike somewhere that you're traveling to, you can take a power meter with you.
We got
Any other questions? Okay, Jazzy, the floor is yours.
All right. Hey, Jeremy, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. And we're definitely going to get you back. I think there's a number of topics that we can dive into with you. You have such a great perspective and the insider's look from all your time in the industry. And I think it's just so valuable. I found it awesome. I mean, I've been in this space for a long time, and there's even a couple takeaways that if and when I get back to racing, which is never going to happen, I will utilize. So anyway, is there another question coming through?
No, just a couple of comments. Most people just, taking a shot at me.
That's fair.
Yeah,
That's
it's very fair. I can take it. That's okay.
Open the floor for people to take a shot at Jeremy.
Yeah. I want to thank you guys as well for your time. And, I'm always available to talk about this. As you can see, I can be a little bit long-winded with it, but if you guys want some one-on-one time to ask some of the questions that maybe you didn't get a chance to ask this morning, any of your coaches at B78 can put you in touch with me. And again, we can do a conference call on this as well too. I'm always happy to help and make you guys better athletes. One of the things I didn't mention is that Jasper and I have known each other for a long time, but I was also one of Jasper's athletes. I think I was his biggest pain in the butt athlete, which is why he probably handed me off to every coach that's in B78 until he finally took me back. Because I think I was the one that would sort of like, you were using me as a determination as to whether or not your coches could hack it. Hey, if you can coach Jeremy, then
you were the test.
Yeah, exactly. But I really enjoyed working with B78 athletes as well as the coaches. It's a fantastic group, and you guys are in great hands.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Really appreciate it. And we have this recorded. So for anybody who missed it, or if you know anybody who might be interested in this, we'll make sure they get the link, because I think it's some really good stuff here. So thanks, buddy. That was great.
You. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.